My father always told me our family's secret would destroy me if I ever found out. He was wrong. It destroyed everyone else first. If this made your day easier, make mine better with a quick like and subscribe. Thank you. I was at home when the phone rang, and it was the kind of call no parent should ever get. The juvenile detention center told me my son had been beaten so badly his skull was fractured. They said it was over some gang dispute between him and his cellmate. My heart dropped. I knew immediately that didn't make sense. My boy didn't run with gangs and neither did his cellmate. Something was off. I drove like a maniac to the hospital, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. When I got there, doctors told me the words every parent fears, *, prepare for the worst. *, my son was bleeding in his brain. I sat in that waiting room with two thoughts torturing me, *, is he going to live, *, and why are they lying about what happened? When the surgeon finally came out and said my son would survive, I felt this flood of relief. I wanted to fall to my knees and cry. But that joy didn't last long. There was permanent damage. The part of his brain that controls speech had been hit. My son would never be able to tell me he loved me again, or tell me what really happened that night. And then the doctor pulled me aside. His face was grim, voice low. My boy didn't just have head injuries. He had internal injuries too, week-old trauma. The kind you don't get from a fistfight. The next morning, I stormed into the detention center. At the front desk was Officer Bryant, the same man who had called me about the so-called fight. He gave me this fake sympathetic look and asked, *, how's Caleb? *. I shot back, he can't talk anymore. Jason really did that much damage. Bryant shrugged. Fights get brutal here. And right there I knew. I knew he was lying. Because Jason's mom had already shown me paperwork, her son had been locked down in solitary since Sunday. He couldn't have touched my boy. I said it out loud and Bryant's whole face changed. He jumped up so fast papers scattered off his desk. She must be mistaken, he stammered. That's when Jason's mom herself walked in, loud and clear, signing the visitation book for her son in lockdown Unit B. Bryant went pale as a ghost. He'd been caught lying red-handed. A second later he dismissed me like I was nothing and waved me out the door. That night, while I sat by my son's hospital bed, an unknown number lit up my phone. I answered and a woman whispered, *, I work at the facility. I heard about your boy. Tuesday nights, certain kids get pulled into the counseling room instead of going to bed. Your son was one of them. *. My hand shook so bad I almost dropped the phone. Because guess what? Caleb's injury happened Tuesday night. The very next day I confronted the warden, Sparks. I laid it all out, Tuesday counseling, my son's injuries, the lies. He slid a file across his desk like that would shut me up. Your son had pre-existing conditions, he said. I grabbed that paper and my stomach turned. The intake form was dated weeks earlier, but I could smell the fresh ink. The signature wasn't mine. They were forging records to cover up abuse. You're hiding sexual assault, I said. My voice was shaking. He leaned back, cold as ice. *, that's a serious accusation. Be careful, Mr. Williams. Defamation of correctional staff is a crime. *. In the parking lot, I wasn't even to my car when a woman approached me. They got your boy too, she said and showed me her phone. Her nephew had the same brain injury 3 months ago. Her sister's boy 6 months back. She'd been tracking cases, 17 boys in 2 years. Every one of them hurt on a Tuesday night. Everyone losing the ability to speak. Same targeted trauma. They're silencing the kids, she whispered. Making sure they can't testify. And then she showed me a message one of the victims had smuggled out. There were cameras hidden inside that counseling room. The warden kept the recordings. I thought, finally, evidence, but when I went to the police I hit a wall. The desk sergeant didn't even let me finish. The guards' names I gave him? All connected to people higher up. Internal affairs, deputy chief, even politicians. The sergeant leaned in and said, *, you file false reports against law enforcement, you'll end up in a cell next to your son. *. I left shaking. They weren't going to help. They were protecting their own. So I called in my own backup, my brother Deshaun and my cousin James. Both had done time. Both knew how the system really worked. They're destroying kids' speech centers so they can't talk, I told them. My son had a contact inside, someone in maintenance. Said the counseling rooms left unlocked on Tuesday nights. Bryant works it alone. 3 nights later, just before midnight, we slipped in through the service door. My heart was pounding in my throat as we crept down that hallway. Through the counseling room window we saw him. Officer Bryant. Pants undone. A boy, barely 14, bent over the table sobbing. Deshaun didn't hesitate. He kicked the door clean off its hinges. The kid collapsed to the floor, shaking. James dropped his jacket over him and scooped him up like he was his own son, whispering, *, you're safe now. *. Bryant fumbled for his radio, but Deshaun knocked it away and shoved a phone in his face, recording everything. I lost it. My fist connected with his jaw before I even realized I'd moved. He went down hard, blood spilling from his nose. Deshaun's voice was cold. *, start talking. About Caleb. About all 17 boys. *. Bryant broke instantly. Sobbing, bleeding, begging. *, it's not just us. The warden sells the videos. Hidden cameras. Judge buys them. State Senator Davies, $50,000 per video. *. My stomach turned. This wasn't just corruption, it was a ring. Deshaun pressed harder. Bryant spilled more. *, if they can't talk, they can't testify. Henderson knew how, targeted trauma to the brain. *, then he gave us the jackpot, the location of the recordings. Warden's office safe behind his family picture. Combination 0-7-1-5. Deshaun disappeared down the hall and came back 20 minutes later carrying a hard drive. Hundreds of videos. Evidence. Proof. Meanwhile, Bryant was still on the floor, shaking so bad his teeth chattered, snot and blood mixing as he cried. I yanked him up by his shirt. My fist was aching, but I didn't care. Whatever pain he felt was nothing compared to what they'd done to our kids. Deshaun filmed while I demanded names. Bryant stammered out more, 2 more guards, the Harden brothers. Officers Aaron and Caden. They rotated shifts to cover more nights. And then he told me how they picked the victims. They combed through intake forms, looking for kids from single-parent homes, low-income addresses, families with no lawyer. Easy targets. They thought no one would fight back. I wanted to kill him right there. But then I glanced at the boy we'd saved. He was curled up in the corner, still trembling under James's jacket, too scared to even speak. I crouched down, softened my voice and told him, "You're safe now. No one's ever going to hurt you again." He nodded, wide-eyed, silent. And I swear to God, I promised myself I was going to make sure of it. And that was just the beginning. When Deshaun called me over, I didn't know what to expect. He was hunched over his phone, scrolling through the hard drive we'd just taken. My stomach twisted the second I saw it. Hundreds of video files neatly organized by date, stretching back years. And next to each one, a price tag. Buyer initials. Exactly what Bryant had confessed. SD 50,000. Senator Davies. JH 30,000. The judge. I felt my throat close up. These weren't just files. These were kids being sold like products. Like livestock. And then I saw the timestamp. The Tuesday my son was hurt. The file was there. My hand hovered over it, but I couldn't press play. Not yet. I couldn't bring myself to see it. Meanwhile, Bryant was still crumpled on the floor, sobbing through blood and snot. But reality hit me hard. We didn't have much time. Someone was bound to notice he was missing from his post. Deshaun rummaged through a supply closet and came back with extension cords, while James grabbed duct tape from a maintenance cart. We bound Bryant's hands and ankles, gagged him, and left him right there in the same room where he'd tortured so many boys. He made muffled noises through the tape, but I didn't care. I wasn't listening. James lifted the rescued boy, still wrapped in his jacket. The kid clung to him like a lifeline, burying his face in James' shoulder. Deshaun tucked the hard drive under his arm, pocketed his phone, and gave me a nod. I checked the hall one last time, every nerve in my body on fire. Then we slipped out the service door and into the night. The courtyard was eerily silent, our footsteps echoing against the concrete. We got into the car, James in back with the boy, me at the wheel, Deshaun riding shotgun. My pulse was hammering so hard I thought for sure it would give us away. I forced myself to drive calm and steady, no sudden moves, no panic. Deshaun directed me to Josephine's house, his girlfriend. She was a licensed foster parent and had taken in kids before. 20 minutes later, we pulled into her driveway. She was already standing at the door, waiting. When she saw the boy, she didn't waste a second. She ushered him inside, sat him on the couch, got him a blanket and water. She moved with the kind of tenderness only someone who'd done this before could have. And finally, for the first time, the boy spoke. "My name is Ryder," he whispered. "Ryder Melton. 14. I've been in detention 3 months." His crime? Shoplifting food because he was starving. That was it. And then he told us it wasn't his first time in that counseling room. It was his first time. They said it was an evaluation. Bryant locked the door. Each visit got worse. They told him if he ever spoke up, they'd hurt him more. Everyone in his unit knew, but the fear kept them silent. Josephine grabbed her camera and began documenting every injury. Bruises on his arms. Marks on his wrists. She explained everything as she worked, gentle, calm, reassuring. She said she'd seen boys come through before, broken, traumatized, unable to explain what happened. Now it finally made sense. Some had brain injuries like Caleb. Others were too scared to talk. And here was the proof, sitting right in front of us. Ryder started crying again, and Josephine held him while he sobbed into her shoulder. Meanwhile, Deshaun was already copying the hard drive onto multiple laptops. James ran to the store for more USB sticks. Deshaun set up encrypted uploads to cloud accounts under fake emails, insurance in case the worst happened. I sat there, staring at my phone, thinking of my son in that hospital bed. Machines beeping. Nurses checking him every hour. And him lying there silent, because monsters like Bryant had stolen his voice. I scrolled to a number Timothy's aunt had given me and hit dial. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the phone. She answered on the third ring, and when I told her we had everything, the videos, the confession, she broke down crying. She said she'd waited 2 years for someone to finally believe her about what happened to Timothy. By the time James returned, Deshaun had USB drives scattered across the table, loading one after the other. He handed me 5, told me to stash them in separate places. James took 3 more to hide at his place. We agreed to regroup in the morning, but I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every sound, every image. I saw Bryant's face when we caught him. I saw my son's face, pale and silent in a hospital bed. How many Tuesday nights had it been Caleb in that room? At dawn, my phone buzzed. News alerts. Every local station was running the same story. Officer Bryant had been found tied up in the detention center. Warden Sparks told reporters it was gang-related, that rival members broke in for revenge. Bryant was painted like some unlucky hero, caught in the middle. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. A woman's voice. Bryant's wife. She said her husband wanted to make a deal. He'd testify against everyone if we didn't press charges. Deshaun, sitting beside me, shook his head, trap. But I said yes. We needed his testimony. An hour later, I walked into a diner downtown. His wife was waiting, slumped in a booth, eyes swollen from crying. She said she hadn't known a thing until he came home bloody the night before. Then she slid her phone across the table. Text messages. Bryant and the other guards casually chatting about Tuesday nights. About which boys they'd take to counseling. Dates, details, all of it. My stomach churned as I read. She told me Bryant confessed about the warden selling videos, about deliberately damaging the boys' speech centers so they couldn't testify, about the judge and senator buying recordings. I told her flat out, if he wanted any chance at leniency, he needed to turn himself in and cooperate with an investigation. She said she'd already told him the same thing. But then she grabbed my arm, eyes wide, and whispered, asterisk, you're all in danger now. The warden has connections everywhere. He won't let this evidence out without a fight. Asterisk. When I left the diner, I kept checking my mirrors the whole drive home. My gut was screaming something was about to happen. And sure enough, when I pulled up to my building, 2 police cruisers were waiting. 4 officers approached, one holding papers. A warrant for my arrest for assaulting Bryant. Retaliation. I didn't run. They'd twist that to make me look guilty. Deshaun pulled up across the street, jumped out, and immediately started live streaming. His voice carried through the neighborhood. Asterisk, they're arresting him for exposing child abuse. Asterisk. The cops hesitated when they saw the camera, but the lead officer still grabbed me, twisted my arms behind my back, and cuffed me so tight it burned. He read my rights as if it was all routine. My neighbor stood frozen, watching. The shame, the anger, it was boiling in me, but I stayed quiet. At the station, they fingerprinted me, snapped a mugshot, and dumped me in a holding cell that stank of piss and vomit. Hours passed before Deputy Chief Henderson himself swaggered in, medals glinting on his chest. He leaned over the table and said I was in serious trouble for attacking his brother's colleague. I told him I wanted a lawyer. He sneered. Asterisk, lawyers can't help someone who broke into a government facility and assaulted staff. 20 years, Mr. Williams. Your son grows up without a father. Asterisk. I stared at the wall and said nothing. He slammed his hand down, trying to scare me. But then the door opened. A young woman walked in, briefcase in hand. I'm Haley Robbins, court-appointed attorney for Mr. Williams. This interview is over. Henderson's face turned crimson. He stormed out, spitting threats. When the door shut, Haley leaned close and whispered, asterisk, I've been waiting years for someone to expose this. Families have filed complaints, but we never had hard proof. Until now. Asterisk. She got me released on bail an hour later, citing improper arrest procedures. Outside, she asked if I had evidence. I took her to Deshaun's apartment and showed her a USB drive. She watched 30 seconds of one video before rushing to the bathroom to throw up. When she came back, pale and shaking, she said, asterisk, this is enough to bring them all down. Asterisk. She made calls, set up a meeting with an FBI agent, Donald Wyatt, corruption specialist already circling Senator Davies for campaign finance violations. She said this might be the missing piece. The next morning, we met Wyatt at a federal building. He reviewed the videos, the confessions, everything. His hands shook. He immediately opened a federal case. Local law enforcement was shut out. He assigned agents to protect us and Ryder. That night, the FBI raided the detention center. Sparks was pulled from his bed at 3 a.m. They seized computers, safes, financial records. The news showed agents hauling boxes while parents watched from behind police tape, crying and shouting. The next day, Bryant turned himself in. His wife convinced him it was his only chance. He wore a wire, met with Henderson and Cole. He was shaking so badly that Henderson asked if he was sick. Bryant said he was worried about the FBI raid. Henderson and Cole immediately started talking, destroying evidence, moving money, warning the Hardin brothers. They admitted everything right there on tape. By the end of the day, the FBI had Cole, Henderson, and the Hardin brothers in cuffs. The brothers tried to run but got tackled in their own backyard. One by one, they all turned on each other. Cole said it was Henderson's idea to target the speech centers. Henderson said the warden ran the whole operation and pocketed most of the money. The Hardin brothers swore they were forced into it or risked losing their jobs. Agent Wyatt told me straight, they were all facing federal charges. Mandatory minimums, 25 years. And for the first time since Caleb landed in that hospital bed, I felt like maybe, just maybe, justice was coming. The next morning, Agent Wyatt called me into his office and covered his desk with bank records like a grim jigsaw puzzle. He walked me through line after line, wire transfers going back 6 years from the judge to Cayman Islands accounts. The dates matched the nights the videos were made. Over $2 million, just from him. Then he flipped to another spreadsheet. Senator Davies, worse, $3.8 million funneled through shell companies his accountant had built like nesting dolls. I was gripping the chair so hard my fingers hurt when Wyatt slid over a payment log cross-referencing every transfer with each victim's assault date. And there it was, Caleb's name with $50,000 typed beside it. My knees went weak, I had to sit before I fell. 3 days later, Ryder had to testify before the grand jury. Josephine drove him to the federal courthouse downtown and held his hand for 2 solid hours while prosecutors asked about every moment in that room. I paced the hallway and watched the second hand crawl. When they finally brought him out, he was shaking, eyes glassy, but the prosecutor told us he did incredible, gave them exactly what they needed for indictments. That afternoon the arrests hit the news and my phone blew up. Parents I'd never met called nonstop. My son wants to talk. With the guards behind bars, 17 boys came forward in a week. Every single one had the same pattern of injury, and doctors wrote it plainly: deliberate trauma to the speech center. The FBI went back to the warden's house with better gear and found a hidden room behind a basement bookcase, an entire studio, editing rigs, mixers, soundproofing, easily $500,000. Backup drives were stacked like bricks, labeled by date and victim going back 8 years. Every morning I drove to the hospital to sit by Caleb's bed and tell him we got the bad men. He can't answer, but his eyes follow my face, and when I say, "Bryant's going away forever," he squeezes my hand harder than he has since the injury. The nurses call it a good sign, his brain finding ways to heal. Haley came by with a mountain of paperwork for the civil suit she's filing, against the state and every last person involved. She said the settlement would cover lifetime care for all the boys, plus punitive damages that could break $100 million. 2 days later, the judge tried to run. Airport security grabbed him at the international terminal with a fake passport and 30 grand in cash. The arrest video looped on every channel, him crying, swearing he was innocent while they cuffed him and dragged him away. The next morning, Senator Davies held a press conference to deny everything, but reporters had already dug up his shell companies. His own party went on TV demanding he resign and cooperate. By lunchtime, 3 of his biggest donors had yanked their support. That night, Deshaun called from his car, voice tight. 2 men in a black SUV tailed him from his warehouse shift and sat outside his place for an hour. They rolled off only when he dialed 911. The FBI put protection on all of us the next day, agents shadowing me, Deshaun, James, Josephine, Ryder, everyone. Then James called me the next morning, crying. His boss at the auto shop fired him on the spot, said someone important threatened to shut the business down if James kept working there. Haley filed a wrongful termination suit before lunch, and the FBI added witness intimidation to the stack of charges. The scare tactics didn't rattle us, they welded our resolve. 2 weeks later, I finally got news that felt like oxygen. During Caleb's therapy session, a nurse pulled me aside and showed me his progress chart, those flat lines finally curving up. She pointed to the screen tracking his throat movements. He was trying to push out sounds. Not real words yet, rough, broken, but there. New pathways. I sat with him for 3 hours, squeezing his hand every time he managed a new noise, each one like a footstep on a bridge we thought was gone. That afternoon, Bryant's wife walked into Haley's office with a cardboard box and a face that said she hadn't slept in days. She spread out receipts and bank slips, cash withdrawals lining up with camera equipment purchases. She said she'd overheard Bryant on the phone talking about angles and lighting for the counseling room. Divorce papers filed. She wanted immunity in exchange for everything she knew about Bryant's side business, selling copies to private collectors he'd met online. Haley recorded her for 4 hours, every overheard call, every odd errand, 8 years of suspicion finally making sense. 3 days later, Agent Wyatt called me at 2 in the morning. His voice was all business. The FBI had just raided facilities in Georgia and Alabama after combing through the warden's emails. Turns out the same company that ran our lockup operated 6 others across the Southeast, and 3 showed the exact Tuesday night pattern, boys coming out with identical brain injuries. The network was bigger than anyone guessed, over 40 staff across those facilities sharing videos and techniques for silencing victims. Within a week, Officer Henderson's lawyer called the bureau. His client wanted a deal before the others flipped. Henderson came in with Cole, and they spent 12 hours in separate rooms spilling everything: how the warden recruited them, where to hit to wreck the speech center without killing, how they chose victims with no family support or parents they assumed were too poor to fight back. They handed over buyer lists, bank records, the whole blueprint. Both signed plea agreements for 15 years in exchange for testifying against everyone, including the judge, who'd been their biggest customer for 5 years. The next morning, I watched Caleb try a new machine the hospital rolled in, eye tracking across a board of letters. The therapist coached him to hold his gaze long enough for the computer to register a choice and build words. At first it was a scramble of random letters. After 3 days he spelled DAD, and the machine said it out loud in a tinny robot voice. Then slowly LOVE. YOU. It took nearly 10 minutes. I still broke down right there, ugly crying in the therapy room, and the therapist handed me a box of tissues like she'd seen this 100 times and it never stopped mattering. That week, the governor went on camera and announced a full sweep of every juvenile facility in the state, with new federal oversight. They asked Josephine to help design a victim advocacy program, mandatory cameras everywhere, independent monitors reviewing footage weekly. She called me that night in tears, happy ones, because they were finally listening, and her new role meant she could protect kids like Ryder before they ever got hurt. Ryder's foster family specializes in trauma recovery. They've got him in daily therapy now. Josephine visits twice a week and says he's starting to talk about what happened, even though the nightmares still come and he can't be alone in rooms with adult men. The family gets it, they give him space, keep him safe, and remind him every day he's not going back to any facility. Ever. Meanwhile, our civil suit jumped to the front of the line after 3 national networks ran segments and protesters flooded the state capitol with "Justice for Our Boys" signs. Haley said the state's first offer at the settlement conference was $50 million for all victims combined. She actually laughed, stood up, told them we'd see them in court if they thought 17 shattered lives were worth that little. Donations started pouring in from all over the country to cover medical bills while we waited for the real settlement. The one Haley promised would be 10 times their insulting opener. And for the first time in a long time I could picture it, not just headlines and handcuffs but real accountability, and a future where our boys got to heal. A month later I found myself sitting in a heavy wood-paneled hearing room in Washington, staring into the faces of senators as they asked me about Caleb, and all the other boys. Behind them, screens flickered with charts of injury patterns, footage of the detention center's halls, and photos of kids who would never be the same. I told them everything: how local police shielded the guards, how anyone who tried to report the abuse was threatened or silenced. 6 hours later, the chairman closed the session with an apology to every family. He promised new laws, federal oversight of juvenile facilities, mandatory reporting of suspicious injuries straight to the FBI. For the first time, I believed change was possible. 2 months after his arrest, Bryant stood before a federal judge. Even with his cooperation, the gavel came down hard: 25 years. "Your crimes against children are unforgivable," the judge said. They had to tuck him into protective custody that same day because word had already spread through the prison. Then came the warden's trial. I sat in that courtroom every single day, eyes locked on the man who'd ruined my son. Prosecutors played the very videos he sold. Jurors couldn't even watch. One woman ran from the room sobbing. His lawyer tried blaming Bryant, but the bank records told the truth: millions offshore, years before Bryant ever worked there. 23 boys submitted statements, most unable to speak, describing Tuesday nights in the counseling room. Doctors confirmed it: deliberate brain trauma. The jury found him guilty on all 117 counts. The judge called him a monster and sentenced him to life without parole, plus 300 years, just to be sure. They had to drag him out of court screaming about appeals, while families in the gallery clapped and cried. The corrupt judge's trial followed. More victims came forward, kids from his neighborhood, even his youth basketball team. His basement hid thousands of videos behind a false wall. He begged for a deal, but prosecutors already had more evidence than they needed. Guilty. 40 years, no parole for 30. His family stripped him of everything in civil suits. Then Senator Davies, once untouchable, took his turn. He'd used campaign funds to buy videos, even requested certain boys by photo. His wife showed up day one, then vanished and filed for divorce. He got 30 years and lost his $2 million pension, which now went to a victims fund. His wife later faced the cameras, apologizing for not seeing the monster sleeping beside her. As trials ended, heroes emerged. Haley became a national name, the lawyer who took down a predator network. She started a nonprofit firm to protect kids in custody, hiring 5 more lawyers within weeks. Agent Wyatt stood in Washington at a commendation ceremony where the FBI director said our case sparked investigations in 6 more states. He told reporters it wasn't the Bureau alone, it was families like mine refusing to stay quiet. 4 months after that night in the counseling room, Caleb finally came home. His room was lined with medical equipment, computers to help him communicate, and therapy tools. He was learning sign language, his hands growing steadier each day. Deshaun started visiting youth groups, warning kids about predators in the system. Josephine helped him design a program, hotlines, red flags, survival tips, that reached hundreds of kids monthly. James couldn't find work until Haley hired him as an investigator for her firm. His wrongful termination suit settled for $200,000, money he used to buy a house and pursue a PI license. Timothy's aunt started a Thursday night support group at the community center, where families could cry, laugh, and heal together. 6 months after the rescue, I was beside Caleb during therapy when his mouth shifted different. A sound scraped out, rough and broken, *dad. The therapist cried. I cried harder. 2 weeks later, Ryder showed up in a crisp school uniform, hugging me tight. He told me he was pulling straight A's and wanted to be a lawyer like Haley to fight for other kids. Caleb couldn't speak much yet, but Ryder looked him in the eye and called him brave. The state shut down the detention center, turning it into a youth community hub. They mounted a bronze plaque with the names of boys who never made it out alive. At the ceremony, Timothy's aunt spoke of failure, grief, and a promise never to forget. Our case exploded nationwide. Within 6 months, Congress passed Caleb's law. The president signed it in the Rose Garden, Caleb and I sitting in the front row as cameras flashed. The law mandated cameras in every juvenile facility and monthly independent inspections. 8 months later, settlement money rolled in, enough to cover lifetime care. We moved to a quiet neighborhood 40 miles away, where Caleb could heal without stares or whispers. Investigations spread across 12 states, exposing dozens more facilities. 43 arrests. Hundreds of identified victims. Caleb fought his way forward. His right side stayed weak, but he learned to write left-handed. One afternoon, he scrawled 6 shaky words on paper: "thank you for fighting for me. I keep it in my wallet to this day." A year after the rescue, prosecutors needed Caleb's testimony for the last guard on trial. He sat in court, his eye-tracking computer typing each word onto a screen as jurors watched in silence. By the end, the guard's lawyer didn't even cross-examine. Guilty. 30 years. The judge said Caleb's testimony was the bravest thing he'd seen in 4 decades. Life moved forward. Deshaun proposed to Josephine on the anniversary of saving Ryder. 6 months later, they married in her church. Caleb stood as best man, his device voicing words that had the whole room weeping, calling Deshaun a hero. James cracked jokes in his toast, and for once, laughter drowned out all the old pain. Caleb switched to online school, his essays about disability rights inspiring teachers across the country. He told me he wanted to advocate for kids who couldn't speak for themselves. The support group grew to 50 families, meeting monthly at the old detention center, now filled with food, laughter, and children playing. 3 years later, I walked into Caleb's room to find him rehearsing his graduation speech. His voice was rougher, deeper, but clear. "I remember everything that happened," he said, looking at me with steady eyes. "And I'm proud of you for not giving up when everyone told you to stop fighting." My eyes blurred. The therapist smiled, said we were almost at the finish line. 2 weeks later, I sat front row in the community center's main hall, now transformed into a stage for online school's graduation. Caleb walked tall across the stage in his cap and gown, cane in hand, honors on his name. As I watched him take his diploma, all I could think about was that night 3 years ago in the counseling room. We hadn't just survived it, we destroyed their system. We built something better in its place. And as Caleb stood under the lights, strong and unbroken, I knew the fight had been worth everything. My sister tried to destroy me with lies, but I came armed with the truth, and her secrets were darker than anyone imagined. I was on a video call with my brother Logan, making casual plans for Easter break, when his words made my stomach twist. He told me our sister Grace had blown up at our parents after announcing she was dropping out of nursing school. Dad had threatened to cut her off, and in a moment of rage she snapped back with, well, at least I'm not hiding being gay like she is. And that wasn't all. Grace had shown them screenshots from my private Instagram, twisted everything I'd ever posted, and even claimed I was dragging our youngest sister, Anna, into that lifestyle. She painted me as some manipulative villain mocking their faith behind closed doors. Mom broke down in tears, Dad locked himself in his office, and Grace played the role of the dutiful daughter, holding Mom and whispering how she'd always protect them. The second I heard this, I jumped in my car and drove straight to Logan's place. Anna was already there, sobbing. Grace had cornered Mom earlier, saying she'd discovered gay content on Anna's phone and hinting that I had corrupted her. My chest tightened hearing that. Grace wasn't just trying to ruin me, she was dragging Anna into her lies too. Logan sat me down and told me Grace was already making moves to secure power of attorney over Grandma's estate, arguing I couldn't be trusted with family matters anymore. It was like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. We realized this wasn't new. Grace had been playing this game for years. She was the one who secretly needed abortion money in high school, but she let Anna take the blame for a pregnancy scare. She was the one who stole cash from the church fundraiser, then let Logan take the fall while she blew it on spring break. That night, Logan pulled up Grace's Instagram. My jaw clenched. She'd built an entire facade of nursing school, posting selfies in scrubs she never wore to classes that never happened. Our parents had forked over 30 grand for tuition while she blew it on concerts and Miami weekends. Anna dug deeper and pulled up Grace's Venmo history, designer shopping sprees, luxury trips, fake grade reports she'd photoshopped to keep our parents fooled. Logan's girlfriend, who happened to work at the registrar's office, confirmed the worst. Grace wasn't dropping out voluntarily. She'd been expelled months ago for paying someone to sit her anatomy exam. And that was just the start. We unearthed emails where Grace had already secured a $50,000 loan in our parents' names without their consent. She bragged to her friends about sabotaging me, laughing that I'd never see a penny of inheritance. She'd even Googled whether being gay could void a will in our state, and complained when she learned it couldn't. Then we stumbled onto the thefts, credit card statements she'd hidden, forged checks from Dad's business, and online listings of Grandpa's belongings. She'd sold his watch collection, war medals, all the heirlooms meant to stay in the family, pocketing $20,000. Logan even found text threads where Grace was arranging buyers for Grandma's jewelry while Grandma was still alive in hospice. We pulled everything together, 3 years of fraud, theft, and lies stacked into a folder as thick as a Bible. Meanwhile, Grace was flooding the family group chat with Bible verses about homosexuality, prayer requests for my soul, and links to conversion therapy camps that bragged about using electroshock. And the cherry on top? She convinced Mom and Dad to invite their pastor and his wife over for Sunday dinner, an ambush disguised as salvation. When I showed up, I was made to wait on the porch. Mom called it God's house now. At the table, Grace sat smugly with a brand new cross necklace, my seat littered with highlighted verses condemning me. Mom's voice shook with disappointment as she accused me of shaming the family. The pastor chimed in with scripture. Grace leaned in with her fake sympathy, acting like she was trying to guide me. Anna squeezed my hand so hard under the table it left crescent marks on my skin. Then the pastor pressed his hand on my head, praying over me like I was possessed. Grace smirked behind folded hands. And that was it. I stood up. The folder thudded against the table, shaking the water glasses. Grace's smile flickered. Before you lecture me about my soul, I said, my hand firm on the folder, we need to talk about Grace. The pastor's wife gasped. Mom hissed my name. But I opened the folder. Should we start with the pregnancy, or the forged checks? Grace's face drained of all color. I pulled out the registrar's official letter, the crisp paper loud in the silence. Mom snatched it up, her eyes darting across the words that confirmed it. Grace had been expelled for academic fraud 2 months ago. Grace panicked. Her chair screeched across the floor as she lunged, shrieking that the letter was fake, that I was just bitter. Her hands trembled as she tried to grab the paper back, but Mom pulled it out of reach. And the room? Dead silent. I stayed steady, even as Grace's voice pitched higher, desperate. My fingers found the next stack of papers, printouts of her Instagram posts. Every picture showed her in those cheap scrubs she ordered online, posing like she was living the nursing student life. But each post was time-stamped right during the classes she was supposed to be in. Dad's hands shook as he lifted the pages. His reading glasses glinted under the chandelier as his eyes moved slowly across the evidence. Grace immediately jumped in, voice shrill, insisting someone had hacked her account and planted fake photos. She kept darting glances between Mom and Dad, like she could figure out who might still believe her. Then Anna spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried. Grace blamed me for the pregnancy scare in high school. Every head at the table turned. Anna explained how Grace had needed money for an abortion, and when our parents found the test, she let Anna take the shame. Mom's face cracked, like she didn't know which daughter to even look at. Grace snapped back, pointing at Anna. She's lying. She's been manipulated. She's just saying whatever she tells her to. Her finger jabbed toward me like a weapon. Anna's hand found mine under the table again, gripping tight enough to hurt. I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached deeper into the folder and pulled out the Venmo transactions. $30,000 in tuition money, siphoned into concerts, designer shopping, Miami weekends, even Coachella tickets. Each payment lined up perfectly with the dates Mom and Dad wrote those tuition checks. I laid them out in front of everyone. The pastor cleared his throat and murmured about handling this privately. I didn't even look at him. I kept spreading the papers like cards in a deck. Dad finally raised his head, fixing his eyes on Grace. His voice was low, controlled, but it had that sharp edge that made the whole room freeze. Have you even been in school this semester? Grace's eyes welled up on command, tears spilling as she pressed her hands against her face. You're all ganging up on me, she wailed, trying to stumble toward Mom for comfort. But Mom just sat there, stiff, staring at the piles of evidence covering her Sunday dinner table. Logan slid his phone across to Dad. On the screen were screenshots of Grace's texts, bragging about how she'd ruined me, laughing about me getting kicked out, saying she couldn't wait for me to be homeless while she collected inheritance money. The pastor's wife leaned toward him, whispering about leaving. He shook his head. We need to stay. Witnesses. I drew in a breath and let it out slow. Then I looked each person in the eye. I am gay. And I'm not ashamed of it. You can use my identity like a weapon, but it won't erase what Grace has done. The room went silent, except for Grace's muttering. Perversion, perversion, she repeated, like the word alone could erase 3 years of theft and deceit. I reached for the next set of papers, the forged checks from Dad's business account. One by one I slid them out. Sloppy signatures, amounts that didn't match, and then the chilling ones, the ones clean enough that the bank had actually cashed them. Dad's confusion hardened into fury. He snatched up his phone, dialing the fraud department without hesitation. His voice was like steel as he told the rep on the other end that he needed to report multiple cases of forgery. Grace panicked, inching toward the dining room door, but Logan stood up, blocking her path. Mom finally found her voice, broken and raw. How could you do this to us, Grace? Grace's whole body shook. She pointed at me again, voice trembling but loud. She forged them. She hacked everything. She's bitter and twisted, she made all of this up. But no one was listening anymore. The paper spoke louder than her words, page after page, detail after detail. Too much to fake. Too much to ignore. I slid out the credit card statements next. The papers whispered across the table as I spread them between water glasses and half-eaten bread. Mom picked up the first one, and her eyes widened with every line she read. A $2,000 handbag from Nordstrom. A list of luxury stores she'd never even stepped foot in. Her hands shook so badly the paper crinkled. Dad grabbed another statement, his calculator app open, punching in totals. His face turned redder with each number. Grace lunged for the papers, but Logan caught her wrist mid-grab, holding her in place. The pastor tried again, voice smooth but shaky. Maybe we should all pray. Dad sliced his hand through the air, cutting him off. Prayer won't fix fraud and theft, he snapped, his other hand still pressed to the phone at his ear. Grace's back was pressed to the wall now, Dad on the phone with the bank, Logan standing guard. Then Anna pushed her chair back with a screech that cut through the tension. She stood, trembling but loud. She's been blackmailing me, Anna said. She went through my phone and found posts I liked about pride. She said she'd tell Mom I was gay too, unless I gave her half my paycheck. The words hit like a hammer. Grace's denials came out in rapid-fire bursts. First Anna was lying, then Anna offered the money, then it was just a loan. Her story shifted every few seconds, unraveling faster than she could stitch it back together. And everyone at the table? We saw it for what it was. The truth was right there, stacked in ink and numbers between us. Grace was cornered. And she knew it. I reached back into the folder and pulled out the papers I knew would hit the hardest. Marketplace screenshots. I laid them down in front of Dad, one by one, careful and deliberate. His breath caught when he saw Grandpa's Purple Heart listed as sold, $800. The next page showed his prized watch collection gone. 20 grand total. Dad stood so fast his chair toppled backward, slamming against the floor. His fists clenched, knuckles white, and for a terrifying second I thought he might actually strike her. Grace must have thought the same because she bolted for the door. But Logan was already there, arms crossed, immovable. You need to face what you've done, he told her. Grace shrieked that we were jealous of her success, called herself the only good child in this sick family. Her voice cracked on the word good. The pastor and his wife rose quietly. The pastor's tone was grim as he gathered his Bible. This is no longer a spiritual matter. It's a legal one. His wife wouldn't meet anyone's eyes as she whispered that they should have never gotten involved. They left without another word. Dad's voice thundered next. Your phone. Your laptop. Now. His demand shook the air. Grace shook her head violently, darting toward the stairs. She made it 3 steps before Mom's voice cut through the chaos. One word. Enough. The command froze Grace mid-step. She turned slowly, her face drained of color. Mom told her to sit and explain the $50,000 loan applications we'd uncovered, the ones filed with their social security numbers. Grace's red-faced fury flickered into fear. Her knees buckled as she slumped into her chair, staring at the mountain of evidence. I spoke calmly, explaining how Logan's girlfriend at the registrar's office had confirmed the truth. Grace had been expelled 2 months ago, not last week like she claimed. She'd paid someone $500 to take her anatomy exam, got caught, and was booted permanently. Every tuition check after that had gone straight into her pocket. Mom's tears returned, but this time they burned with anger. Dad was still on the phone with the bank, jotting down case numbers with a shaking hand. Grace made one last play. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing about the crushing pressure of being the perfect daughter. Her cries grew more frantic when no one moved to comfort her. Dad didn't even glance at her. He pulled out his phone again and dialed another number. "Whitney Maddox, please," he said. "Tell her it's a family emergency involving fraud." He put the call on speaker. Whitney's voice was crisp and unwavering. She listened as Dad explained the forged checks, the stolen tuition, the fraud. When he finished, her instructions were clear. File a police report tonight, freeze every account before Grace drained them further. Grace shot out of her chair, knocking over Mom's water glass. "Don't call the police. I'll pay it back," she cried. Dad's eyes narrowed. "With what? You don't have a job. You don't have a degree. How exactly do you plan to do that?" All she could do was stammer, "I'll figure it out." Then Logan dropped another bomb. He revealed he'd already contacted Grandma's hospice, worried about Grace's attempts at power of attorney. The administrator confirmed someone matching Grace's description had tried to access estate documents the day before. Security footage proved it. Grace screamed he was lying, until Logan pulled up the email confirmation with time-stamped footage. Anna stood then, crossing to Mom with her phone. Screenshot after screenshot of texts from Grace. Threats to out her to their youth group. Links to conversion camps. Messages dripping with cruelty, calling Anna disgusting, promising to ruin her life if she didn't hand over half her paycheck. Mom's face crumpled as she scrolled through. Grace lunged for the phone, but Dad stepped in her way. And then Grace pulled her final desperate card. She pressed a hand to her stomach and announced she was pregnant, that she needed money for her baby. Anna laughed. Actually laughed. Then she pulled up Grace's Instagram videos from just last week. Grace pounding shots at a club, dancing on tables, bragging the next morning about being hungover. Snapchat from yesterday showed her sipping wine at brunch. Every clip date stamped. Grace stammered they were old videos, but the evidence didn't lie. Dad's phone rang again. He stepped aside, jaw tight as he listened. When he returned, his voice was cold. The bank had frozen every account, flagged suspicious activity going back 6 months. Tomorrow morning, they'd review ATM footage of withdrawals Grace couldn't explain. That's when Grace snapped. She lunged across the table, knocking plates to the floor, red wine spilling across Mom's white tablecloth. Logan grabbed her before she could reach the folder. She kicked, screamed, swore she'd ruin us, swore she'd tell the whole church I'd converted Anna. I stood, meeting her wild eyes. "Your threats don't scare me anymore. The truth is out. No lie can bury it now." She spat toward me. It landed on the table, dark and ugly. And then Mom finally broke. Her voice shook the room. "Get out." Grace's shriek echoed. "Where am I supposed to go? You destroyed everything." Dad's voice was colder than I'd ever heard. "You should have thought about that before you stole from your family. 1 hour. Essentials only. Anything else goes on the police report." Grace stormed upstairs, her sobs shaking the walls. A door slammed so hard a framed photo fell in the hall. Mom crumpled into her chair, whispering over and over, how had they missed the signs, how their daughter could betray them so deeply. I sat beside her, explaining how Grace had pitted us all against one another for years, twisting trust and faith into shields for her lies. For the first time since this nightmare began, Mom reached for my hand. Her grip trembled, but it was real. Logan called the police non-emergency line, steady as stone, asking what documentation we'd need. Anna opened her laptop, starting a spreadsheet to catalog every relationship Grace had poisoned. Dad was in his office, speaking to credit card companies, his voice professional but his hands unsteady. Upstairs, Grace raged, throwing things, shouting into her phone about her psycho family. Whitney stayed on speaker, guiding us step by step, ensuring every legal door was locked behind Grace. 20 minutes later, she came thundering down the stairs with 2 suitcases, eyes wild. She dumped them by the door and turned on us. "If you call the police," she screamed, "I'll kill myself. And it'll be your fault." Whitney's voice cut through instantly, calm and firm. "That's classic manipulation. If you believe her, call 911 immediately." Grace's face went scarlet at that. She screeched that I destroyed the family with my sick lifestyle, cursed me with God's wrath. But her words no longer had teeth. Everyone in that room saw her for what she was. She yanked the door so hard it smashed the wall, knocking down her graduation photo. Logan actually laughed. Then she stormed out, dragging her suitcases. A minute later, the sound of tires screaming against asphalt told us she was gone. The next morning, Dad loaded us all into the car and drove straight to the police station. We were introduced to Detective Eliza Groves, a tall woman with sharp eyes and steel gray hair who looked like she'd seen it all. She took the massive folder of evidence we'd built and started leafing through it page by page, her brow furrowing deeper with every sheet. Her verdict? Grace wasn't just dabbling in bad decisions. This was a clear pattern of fraud, felony-level fraud. She questioned us for nearly 2 hours, making copies of everything, her pen scratching across her notepad non-stop. Halfway through, Dad's phone buzzed. His accountant was calling. Dad's face went stiff as he listened, then he put the phone on speaker. A luxury apartment lease had popped up on his business credit report. The lease had been signed 3 months ago in his name, using his business credit card. $12 grand in back rent. Grace had been living there the whole time, calling it her study group apartment. Detective Groves wrote it down immediately. "That shows planning and intent," she said flatly, which only made my stomach sink deeper. From the station, we headed straight to Dad's bank. The manager ushered us into a back office and pulled up security footage. And there she was. Grace, hiding behind oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap, withdrawing the daily maximum from Dad's account, transaction after transaction. The manager didn't mince words. This was textbook fraud. He helped Dad file reports for every charge, saying the police report would strengthen the case for reimbursement. Just as we were leaving, Dad's phone rang again. Whitney. And her voice was urgent. The $50,000 loan Grace had applied for under my parents' names had just been approved. The funds would hit the account by tomorrow morning unless they stopped it immediately. Dad spent 3 exhausting hours on the phone, bouncing between departments, faxing copies of the police report, signing identity theft affidavits. Finally, the loan was canceled, but not without a cost. His credit score took a hit, and Dad's jaw stayed tight the rest of the day. That night, the storm really hit. Grace blew up our phones, first with long, sobbing apologies, begging for help. Then, minutes later, with venom, threats that she'd ruin us if we didn't drop the charges. On Facebook, she painted herself as a martyr. Asterisk, my parents disowned me for protecting my sister from sin. They chose their gay daughter over me, the straight one who tried to save her. Asterisk. Most people saw through it though. Comments trickled in, questioning her story. Meanwhile, Anna couldn't handle the constant chaos anymore. She packed a bag and asked Logan if she could crash at his place. That night, the two of them started contacting the people who'd bought Grandpa's belongings on Marketplace. One older man who'd bought Grandpa's Purple Heart was devastated when he learned the truth. Grace had told him the family needed money for medical bills. The man promised to send it back immediately, refusing even to take money for shipping. He apologized, voice cracking, like he had done something wrong. At home, Mom stayed in her room most of the day, crying and praying. She kept asking what she'd done wrong, how she'd failed as a mother. I sat with her, holding her hand for the first time in months, and told her the truth. Grace's choices were her own. Grace had fooled all of us. Mom sobbed harder, whispering that she felt blind and stupid. I told her Grace had been running cons since we were kids. She'd just gotten better at hiding them. Mom finally asked the question that had been haunting her. Did I think Grace would really hurt herself? I answered honestly, Grace only cared about herself too much for that. The next morning, Detective Groves called with another blow. Grace had applied for credit cards using Anna's name. Thankfully, Anna was too young and the applications were denied, but the intent was enough. It was another felony. Groves asked Anna to come in for a statement. Dad's hands trembled as he hung up the phone. And before we could even catch our breath, Anna came downstairs, pale and shaking. Grace had shown up at her school that morning. She'd been waiting by Anna's car, grabbing her arm, whispering frantically that Anna needed to tell police she was confused about everything. Security had to physically pull her off. Within an hour, we were at Whitney's office. Her assistant, Jeremy, set Anna up with restraining order paperwork, his calm voice guiding her trembling hands. He said the security footage and witnesses would make the emergency order stick. Anna had to write down everything Grace said, including the threats about ruining her college future if she didn't help. By that afternoon, the order was filed. 2 days later, Whitney called with another update. Grace had been fired from her mall job. The manager, suspicious about missing inventory, had checked the cameras. Grace had been processing fake returns and pocketing the cash. They wanted to press charges, adding another felony to her growing list. Whitney sounded almost grimly satisfied. It painted a crystal-clear picture of a serial thief. Dad spent the following morning with his accountant, combing through every transaction. The total damage? $28,000 in forged checks. Another $12,000 in unauthorized credit card charges. Insurance would cover some, but Dad would still lose tens of thousands. He came home looking older, his face gray, blood pressure meds shaking in his hands. That night, the church elder called. He suggested Dad step down from leadership for the sake of unity, since the family's situation was causing division in the congregation. Dad didn't fight him. Just said okay and hung up. Mom broke down again, pushing her plate away, retreating to her room. Later, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was one of Grace's old college friends. She said Grace had been spinning a story, telling everyone I'd planted evidence out of jealousy. But once the police report leaked, her friends stopped believing her. She added that Grace had lied about working at a law firm too. She'd actually been unemployed for months. The friend forwarded screenshots of Grace claiming our whole family was homophobic. I sent everything to Whitney, who added it to the case file. The next afternoon, hospice called in a panic. Someone had tried sneaking into Grandma's room after visiting hours, claiming a family emergency. The staff described her perfectly, Grace again. She demanded access to Grandma's jewelry, insisting it was for a funeral. Security threw her out, but not before she made a scene in the lobby. We had to lock down visitation, limiting the list to just us. Logan was so furious he punched a hole in his apartment wall. 3 days later, Mom finally sat me down at the kitchen table. Dad was gone, buried in meetings with lawyers. Her face was raw, her eyes swollen. She told me she'd been thinking about everything and realized something important. Grace's betrayal was worse than anything else. She admitted she still needed time to fully understand my sexuality. But she also said she finally saw the difference between disagreement and destruction. Grace had taught her that. For the first time in months, Mom reached for my hand on her own. Her grip was warm, steady. "Did you always know?" She whispered. "Since middle school," I told her. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I just wish you'd felt safe enough to tell me sooner. The following week, Detective Groves called with news we'd all been waiting for. They were finally bringing Grace in for formal questioning. She showed up at the station with a public defender by her side, and the first thing out of the lawyer's mouth was, "My client won't be saying anything." Detective Groves later told us that move alone made Grace look guilty as sin. Still, without a confession, they had to release her, but not before slapping her with an order, no contact with family members. Grace lasted 2 hours. 2. Then Mom's phone rang from a blocked number. The moment she heard Grace's voice, Mom hung up and immediately called Groves to report the violation. Meanwhile, Logan had been combing through old emails when he found something that made my stomach twist. Grace had been selling our personal information on shady websites, full lists of social security numbers, Mom's maiden name, old addresses. She'd sold our lives off piece by piece for fast cash. By the time we found out, we'd already been hit. My credit monitoring showed 4 attempts to open new accounts in my name that same week. We had to freeze everything: credit, bank accounts, passwords. Logan's girlfriend got us set up with identity theft protection, but she warned us the fallout could haunt us for years. 2 weeks after the blow-up, Dad got a call from an older man who'd bought some of Grandpa's watches on Marketplace. His voice was heavy with guilt. He said he'd been thinking about it and wanted to do the right thing. He offered to sell them back for exactly what he paid, no profit. Dad met him at a coffee shop and came home with 6 watches, including Grandpa's favorite from the war. Dad cried holding it, said it felt like holding a piece of his father again. The man apologized over and over, saying Grace seemed so desperate, he thought he was helping. Dad just thanked him, grateful someone had been honest when our own daughter wasn't. 3 days later, Anna showed up at my apartment pale and shaking. She pulled an envelope from her backpack, Grace's handwriting all over it, crammed with Bible verses about loyalty and forgiveness. Anna had already called Groves, who arrived within an hour to collect it. She photographed everything, told us this was a clear violation of the restraining order, and warned that the prosecutor would add it to the charges. Grace was running out of rope. Anna was so shaken she stayed with me that night, afraid Grace might show up at our parents' house. The very next morning, I finally kept an appointment I'd been avoiding, a therapy session my doctor had recommended weeks earlier. I sat in that office, spilling out everything, being outed, losing my parents' trust, the nightmare of unmasking Grace. My therapist didn't flinch. She reminded me that Grace using my sexuality as a weapon had nothing to do with my worth as a person. She gave me breathing exercises for when the anger surged and told me healing would take time, but I'd already proven strength by refusing to be silent. 2 days later, Whitney called while I was at work. The bank had reviewed all our fraud reports. Good news and bad. They agreed to reverse about 60% of the charges. Dad would recover $24,000 of the $40,000 Grace stole. The rest? Too old to dispute. Still, Whitney said it was better than most cases she'd handled. At least we got something back, though money was the smallest wound Grace left behind. That same afternoon, Mom called to tell me she and Dad had started marriage counseling. They needed help processing everything, how Grace twisted their faith, used scripture like a shield every time she got caught, and pitted them against each other. The counselor told them Grace weaponized their beliefs to escape consequences. Dad was learning to forgive himself for missing the signs, while Mom was unpacking her guilt over raising someone who could cut so deep. For the first time in months, they weren't just arguing, they were really talking. A week later, Whitney called again, but her voice was tight with frustration. Grace's public defender wanted a plea deal, admit to fraud and identity theft, avoid prison in exchange for probation, restitution, therapy, and no contact with us. He leaned hard on Grace's mental health struggles. We had to decide as a family. Logan was furious, he wanted her locked up. Anna said she'd sleep better knowing Grace couldn't reach us for years. Mom wavered, worried about her daughter's future with a felony. Dad, exhausted, just wanted peace. After endless calls and family meetings, we chose the deal, but on our terms. Grace would pay full restitution, no matter how long it took. 2 years of mandatory therapy. 5 years of no contact. 300 hours of community service. And if she slipped once, straight to jail. 2 weeks later, we all filed into the courthouse. Grace walked in wearing a conservative suit, hair pulled back, trying to look like some picture of remorse. But the act shattered the moment she opened her mouth. She told the judge we were persecuting her for being the only moral one in the family. She called it a misunderstanding. The judge didn't buy a word. He looked her dead in the eye and said he'd rarely seen someone show so little remorse after tearing their own family apart. He accepted the plea deal, but not without punishment. He tacked on 500 more hours of community service and mandatory financial management classes. Grace's lawyer tried to protest, but the judge cut him off. Your client is lucky she's not going to prison. She should thank her family for their mercy. That night, I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mom. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting more Bible verses or another plea to change. But this time it was different. She told me she'd been reading books about LGBTQ people and faith, the ones their marriage counselor had recommended. She admitted she still had questions and struggles, but then she wrote something that made my throat tighten. Asterisk, you're my daughter. That will never change. Asterisk, she said watching Grace's hate had finally shown her what truly breaks a family, and it wasn't who someone loves. For the first time since all of this started, she reached out with something other than disappointment. I cried into my pillow as I texted her back. Asterisk, I love you too, Mom. Asterisk. The next week, Anna asked me to come with her to talk to our parents. We sat in the same living room where that horrific Sunday dinner had played out, and she took a shaky breath. "I'm gay too," she said. Mom's face flickered through about 10 different emotions, while Dad just nodded like he'd already suspected. Anna held my hand as she explained she'd known for years but had been too scared after watching what happened to me. Mom started crying, not angry tears but sorrowful ones. "I didn't make our home safe for you," she whispered. Dad said Grace's betrayal had taught them that honesty deserved respect, even when it tested their beliefs. Mom hugged us both tight. "I'd rather have honest daughters than another Grace." 3 weeks after Grace's plea hearing, Logan invited us all over for dinner to celebrate his girlfriend's promotion. She'd been a rock through everything and already felt like family. For the first time in months, it felt like a real family dinner. Laughter, food, no accusations hanging over the table. Logan raised his glass in a toast, to truth even when it hurt, and to the family bonds that survived Grace's destruction. His girlfriend thanked us for accepting her, said she'd never seen a family fight so hard to stay together. Mom even asked my girlfriend questions about her job, without judgment in her voice. Anna brought her girlfriend too, and nobody made it awkward. Dad leaned back in his chair, pride in his eyes. "I'm proud of my kids for being honest," he said, "even when it's scary." 3 months later, the first restitution check arrived from Grace. Just $200 out of the $40,000 she owed. Dad stared at it a long time before driving downtown to an antique dealer who still had one of Grandpa's watches. He paid $800 to bring it home. The dealer said Grace had told him the family needed money after Grandpa died. Dad locked the watch in his safe with the others we'd managed to recover. Then came my graduation. The whole family showed up in their Sunday best. Anna wore a small rainbow pin on her collar. Mom noticed but didn't say a word. She just squeezed our hands as we walked across campus together. She took endless pictures, beaming, telling other parents, "These are my honest daughters. I'm proud of them." Grace's chair was empty at lunch, but nobody mentioned it. 2 weeks later, while I was packing up my dorm, Detective Groves called. Grace had been arrested in Nevada. She'd tried opening credit cards at 3 different banks with fake documents. This time, federal charges were coming. Crossing state lines turned fraud into a much bigger deal. She'd dyed her hair black and used a fake name, but they caught her anyway. 6 months later, Mom and Dad renewed their vows for their 25th anniversary. Just us kids, Logan's girlfriend, and a simple courthouse ceremony. The judge read something about truth and trust being the foundation of marriage. Mom slipped into her original wedding dress, still a perfect fit. Dad cried as he repeated his vows. At dinner afterward, he raised his glass and said, "Now I know what really matters in a family." The following spring, Anna got her acceptance letter to State University, with a full scholarship for her essay on courage. She'd written about watching her sister tear the family apart with lies while she found the strength to live honestly. The committee called it one of the most powerful essays they'd ever read. That fall, she moved into her dorm and hung pride flags in her window. Logan, ever the planner, chose the 4th of July for his proposal. He got down on one knee at our backyard barbecue, fireworks lighting the sky, and told his girlfriend she'd shown him what real loyalty meant. She said yes instantly. We all cheered while Dad flipped burgers on the grill and Mom cried happy tears. The wedding was set for next summer, and they asked me to stand in the wedding party. 8 months after Grace's arrest, a thick envelope arrived from her lawyer. Her prisoner number was printed on the return address. Inside were 10 rambling pages of her blaming me for everything, calling me names, accusing me of turning the family against her with my gay agenda. I read the first paragraph, then tossed it in the trash without a second glance. 2 years after that cursed Sunday dinner, we all gathered for Thanksgiving at Mom and Dad's. The table was smaller without Grace, but somehow it felt bigger, warmer. Anna brought her girlfriend, Logan's wife showed off ultrasound pictures, Mom cooked all the classics. This time, we actually enjoyed them. When Dad bowed his head to say grace, he thanked God for truth, and for the family who chose honesty over deception. We stayed late, playing board games, sharing stories. No secrets. No schemes. The house was finally peaceful. We weren't perfect. Mom still stumbled sometimes, learning what it meant to have 2 gay daughters. But we were trying. And that was more than we ever had back when Grace poisoned everything with her lies. Everyone told me it was just an accident, but I found the paperwork that proves otherwise. Now I can't unsee it and I can't forgive them. My cousin walked up to me at the family barbecue, squinting like he'd just seen a ghost. "Why are you wearing white after Labor Day?" I laughed, thinking he was just messing with me. "Since when do you care about fashion rules?" But Paul didn't laugh. His face drained of color, and his eyes kept darting around the yard like he was looking for backup. Before I could ask what was wrong, Aunt Paige rushed over, actually ran and crushed me in this suffocating hug. Her voice shook against my ear. "Not this. Not today." I froze. Over her shoulder, I saw Uncle Ted fumbling for his phone, his hands trembling. My grandmother stopped mid-sentence with the neighbors and collapsed into a lawn chair, wiping away tears. "Aunt Paige, you're scaring me," I stammered, trying to pull away. But she only gripped me tighter, like if she let go, I'd vanish. That's when I realized everyone was staring. My cousin Sienna, the queen of sarcastic remarks about my clothes, had mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her brother Jake shuffled closer, clutching a plate of food with shaking hands. You should eat something," he said softly. "I just ate 20 minutes ago." My voice cracked. "Will someone please tell me what's happening?" That's when my mom appeared at my side. Panic flashed in her eyes as she whispered, "Let's go inside, honey. Find you something else to wear." "Mom, it's just a barbecue." I'm not changing. Please, she begged, her voice breaking. We need to talk. Then Amy, another cousin, casually slid between me and the pool. She pretended to be adjusting her sunglasses, but I knew she was blocking me. Are you feeling okay? Like really okay? You're not sad or anything. The whole family had shifted, slowly surrounding me, forming a barrier between me and the water. Even the ice chests had been moved to the far side of the yard. My head spun. I gripped the picnic table to steady myself, and instantly 6 relatives swarmed me. She's not well, someone muttered. I knew this would happen, another voice whispered. Then out of nowhere, Dr. Mayabu, my mom's friend, appeared with her medical bag. She didn't even ask. Just strapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm. Let me check your vitals, sweetheart. I'm fine. I snapped. I'm just dizzy because everyone's acting insane. But Dr. Mayabu's expression tightened. I think we should head to the hospital. Just to be safe. The hospital? For wearing white. I demanded. But no one answered. Instead, they practically shoved me toward her car. When we got there, Dr. Mayabu whispered something to the triage nurse, and suddenly we were whisked straight to the back. No waiting. No questions. Blood tests, heart monitors, endless questions about my mental state. Then a psychiatrist I'd never met walked in, giving me this calm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm Dr. Black. I understand you've been under some stress. Have you had any thoughts of hurting yourself? What? No. Why would you even ask that? A nurse chimed in gently while fiddling with an 4-line I didn't even need. Sometimes trauma anniversaries can trigger reactions we don't expect. Any recent anxiety around water? Pools, beaches, boats? And then the door burst open. My mom stumbled in, face streaked with tears. She locked eyes with me, trembling. Her voice barely a whisper. Take it off. What? The dress. Please, baby. Just take off the white dress. Mom, you're scaring me. What is this about? Her hands were ice cold as she gripped mine. 40 years ago, my sister Greta drowned at our Labor Day picnic. She was 6. And she was wearing her favorite white dress. My chest tightened. I've never heard of Greta. Her voice cracked. I was 8. I was supposed to be watching her, but I got distracted playing with my cousins. She wanted everyone to see her new dress. Those were her last words before she ran to the dock. The room fell silent, except for the hum of machines. Then Mom whispered about Uncle James. How, 5 years later, he wore a white suit to a September wedding, and his boat capsized that same weekend. She broke off, sobbing. Then what? I pushed. Her answer hit me like ice water. Your brother. Igor. He was 8 too. He wore white swim trunks to a pool party in September. He drowned. My stomach dropped. We never talked about Igor's death, just that it was a tragic accident when I was 2. Mom, no. These are coincidences. Terrible, awful coincidences. Greta didn't drown because of a dress. And Igor didn't die because of colors. Tears blurred her face. You knew I couldn't handle it. You knew. That's when I snapped. I tore off the hospital blanket, stormed out of the room, and left them all sitting there. For one fleeting second, I felt powerful. But once I was alone, I collapsed into tears. I cried until dawn. And when I finally woke up, my phone was exploding with missed calls and texts. Dozens of them. Some apologizing. Most accusing. My cousins calling me selfish. My aunts saying I'd shamed the family. The worst ones were threats. One uncle wrote that I'd regret this. Another said I needed to be taught a lesson about respect. My hands shook as I took screenshots, just in case. But I couldn't think about it right then, I had to get to work. 2 hours of sleep, swollen eyes, and I dragged myself through a shower before driving on autopilot. The second I walked in, my coworker glanced up. Her face softened immediately. Are you okay? You look, she didn't finish. Instead, she quietly set a coffee on my desk. Then my boss called me into her office. She looked concerned. Your mom phoned this morning. Said you might be having some kind of breakdown. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I gave her the PG version, left out the cursed clothes and drowning superstition. Just said my family had trauma around water accidents. She nodded slowly. Grief makes people do strange things, she said gently. Take the rest of the day. And if you need to talk to someone professional, we have an assistance program. I grabbed that lifeline immediately. Back home, I couldn't stop replaying it all in my head. The nurse whispering, the doctor's probing questions, the unnecessary for. And all because I wore a white dress. After Labor Day. That night, I grabbed my phone and scrolled until I landed on Paul's name. Out of everyone, he'd looked more shaken than hostile at the barbecue. Maybe, just maybe, he'd actually talk to me. I sent him a text. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? Just us. Please don't tell the others. His reply came fast. Yes. But can I bring my girlfriend for support? I didn't care. I just needed answers. Sure, I wrote back. Later that evening, I was heating up leftover pizza when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. My stomach dropped. I peeked through the blinds. Uncle Ted's SUV. Sitting right there in my driveway. Both he and Aunt Paige inside, whisper arguing, their eyes darting toward my front door. I froze. Then I killed the lights, crouching low like a fugitive in my own home. For 40 minutes, 40 long minutes, I watched them sit there. No knock. No text. Just watching. By the time they finally drove off, my heart was hammering. I realized something terrifying. I was scared of my own family. The next morning, I called the number my boss had given me, the employee assistance line. A warm-voiced woman answered, asking what kind of help I needed. I told her everything. The drownings. The obsession with white clothes. The hospital ordeal. And you know what? She didn't laugh. She didn't treat me like I was crazy. She said she'd set me up with someone who specialized in family trauma and grief. My first appointment was Thursday afternoon. When the day came, I walked into the therapist's office with knots in my stomach. She was younger than I expected, calm and steady in a way that made me feel less like I was unraveling. She asked what brought me in. And I unloaded everything, the barbecue, the whispers, the hospital, my family acting like I'd cursed them. She listened. Really listened. Then she asked me a simple question: what do you want out of this? The answer hit me. I wanted the truth. The real story behind these deaths. Not superstition. Not whispered family myths. Just facts. And I wanted boundaries, space between me and their panic. She gave me homework. Write down everything I knew about each drowning. Don't judge whether it made sense. Just record it. That weekend I took it further. I drove to the library. Walked up to the reference desk, hands trembling, and asked how to find newspapers from 40 years ago. The librarian smiled kindly and showed me the old microfilm machines. Scrolling through reels of blurry headlines, my breath caught when I saw it. A 6-year-old girl drowned at Pine Lake during a family picnic. Greta. The article was tiny, just a few sentences. She'd wandered away. The adults didn't notice until it was too late. Not a single word about a white dress. No mention of curses. I printed it and stared at the page until my hands shook. Monday morning, I finally worked up the courage to call my grandmother. She answered on the third ring, sounding tired. I asked if we could talk about Greta. The second I said her name, she broke down sobbing. Then the line went dead. 5 minutes later, a text from Mom: "You're cruel. Tormenting an old woman like that. You should be ashamed." I threw my phone onto the couch, fighting the guilt clawing at me. But then it buzzed again. A voicemail. Uncle Ted's voice. Weary. Cracked. "I'm sorry for sitting in your driveway. I just wanted to check on you. Your mom hasn't slept since Labor Day. We're worried about both of you." I sat there staring at the phone, torn between fear and guilt. The next day at work, I caught my coworker Rita on lunch break. "Would you help me dig into this? The drownings?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course. My sister works at the courthouse, I can get records." For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Someone outside the family was willing to help. That Saturday, we camped out in the library. Rita showed me how to scroll through the old microfilm reels, and together we dug up everything. Greta's article had a black and white photo of Pine Lake. Search boats cutting through rough waves. The headline screamed about severe weather warnings ignored that day. We cross-checked the date. The National Weather Service archive showed thunderstorms and dangerous wind conditions. Then we pulled Igor's article. Same thing, flash flood warnings the day he drowned. Uncle James? His boating accident happened during what meteorologists later called a microburst, with winds topping 60 miles an hour. Every single tragedy tied to weather. Not clothes. Not colors. Rita spread the printouts across the table like puzzle pieces. She tapped the headlines one by one. "Notice anything?" she asked. And that's when it hit me, none of the articles mentioned clothing. Not once. The curse, the obsession with white after Labor Day, it didn't exist anywhere but in my family's story. About a week later, I opened my mailbox and nearly dropped to my knees. A hospital bill. $3,000. Even after insurance. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the itemized list like it was a horror script. Crisis intervention. Psychiatric evaluation, all these charges for services I never needed. Part of me wanted to march straight to my mom's house and slam the bill down in front of her. But instead, I called my insurance company. The woman on the other end actually sounded sympathetic as I explained how my family had shoved me into unnecessary treatment. She said they'd review my appeal, but it could take weeks. Thursday came and I was back in my therapist's office. She asked me to write down any memories I had about Igor's drowning. I was only 2 years old when it happened, but I remembered the heaviness that lingered afterward. Locks suddenly on every outside door. Strict rules about never going near water. My therapist leaned forward and said something that hit me hard. The no white after Labor Day rule wasn't about fashion. It was about control. When tragedy strikes and you can't stop it, sometimes families invent rules, rituals, to make sense of the chaos. Blaming clothes was easier than admitting supervision failed or warnings were ignored. That night, Mom left me a voicemail. 12 minutes long. I couldn't stomach hearing her voice, so I ran it through a transcription app. And what spilled onto the screen was heartbreaking. She rambled about protecting me, about how the curse was real, how she couldn't lose me too. Then it twisted. She accused me of trying to kill myself just to punish her. She said I wore white on purpose to hurt her. Reading it made my chest ache. The next day, Rita came over with her laptop. She'd made a spreadsheet, columns comparing actual newspaper facts against my family's curse stories. One by one, she pointed out the pattern: no life jackets. Ignoring storm warnings. Adults too distracted or too drunk to notice the kids. Every single tragedy had preventable failures. Blaming clothing was just easier. That weekend, I dug deeper. I tracked down a name mentioned in one of the old articles, a witness named Archie Abbott. Turns out he still lived near Pine Lake. Saturday morning, I knocked on the door of a weathered little house with an overgrown garden. An elderly man answered. I explained who I was, why I needed to understand. He looked uncertain until I said, "I just want to help my family heal." Then he let me in. His living room was filled with old photographs, decades frozen in frames. He pulled out a photo album and pointed to a picture of himself younger, standing at Pine Lake. He remembered that day clearly. The weather was terrible, he said. Radio warnings told everyone to stay off the water. Wind was so bad some families left early. But yours stayed. The adults wanted to keep drinking and playing cards. Archie flipped through his album, pulling out yellowed newspaper clippings. One photo showed the dock that day, waves crashing so hard they sprayed 20 feet inland. Not a single child in the photo wore a life jacket. He shook his head. Nobody at that picnic knew how to swim. A couple adults did, but they were drunk. When Greta wandered to the dock, your mom was playing tag. The grown-ups had their backs turned, card table set up facing away from the water. He paused, his voice low. No one saw her slip. No one heard her hit the water over the wind. By the time they noticed, 10 minutes had passed. The white dress only mattered because it made her easier to spot when they pulled her out. My stomach turned. It had been preventable. All of it. I thanked Archie and drove home in silence, feeling sick. The next morning, I called the hospital records department and requested my files from the Labor Day incident. They told me it'd take a few days. While I waited, I dug into Uncle James's accident. His obituary from 15 years ago painted a vague picture, celebrating a promotion on a boat, accident under investigation. But the phrasing made me suspicious. The Coast Guard was mentioned. So I filed a Freedom of Information request. 3 days later, the hospital called. My records were ready. I sat in my car flipping through 20 pages of notes. Right there on page 1, patient denies suicidal ideation. Appears calm and oriented. Family insisted on evaluation based on clothing choice and date. The psychiatrist's notes were even clearer, no evidence of depression or self-harm. Patient confused by family's reaction. I made copies, sent them to my therapist, and tucked the originals into a folder at home. 2 weeks later, an envelope from the Coast Guard arrived. Uncle James's full accident report. I spread the papers across my kitchen table. The truth was ugly. The boat was carrying 8 people when it was rated for 6. Nobody wore life jackets. The operator's blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. The Weather Service had issued small craft warnings, 6-foot swells, 20-knot winds, and they ignored them. And yet, somehow, my family had passed down a story about white suits. White at a wedding equals death at sea. No. It was drunk boating in a storm. Plain and simple. Reading witness statements about reckless maneuvers, ignored safety flags, I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. My family's superstition was nothing more than denial polished into a myth. I stacked the evidence neatly and picked up my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed Mom. She answered on the second ring, voice exhausted. I told her I had proof. That the curse wasn't real. That every tragedy tied back to weather, alcohol, or lack of safety precautions. Her response? She screamed. Called me a traitor. Said I was dishonoring the dead. I kept my voice calm. The real dishonor is ignoring the truth. It wasn't clothes, Mom. It was choices. She broke down sobbing, accusing me of wanting her to suffer. I told her I loved her, but I couldn't listen to this anymore. Then I hung up. Minutes later, my phone exploded with notifications. Mom had blasted the family group chat, accusing me of spreading lies and erasing Greta, James, and Igor. Some relatives piled on, calling me cruel. But then, Amy spoke up. Maybe it's time we talk about this openly. Jake agreed. Paul chimed in, admitting the clothing rule had caused fear for years. And just like that, the chat erupted. Arguments. Accusations. People choosing sides. My phone buzzed again. A private message from Amy, I'm proud of you. I've suspected the truth for years, but I was never brave enough to say it. More private messages followed. Some angry. Others thanking me. The family was splitting down the middle. But for the first time, we were talking. Not about curses. Not about colors. About the truth. Thursday's therapy session could not come soon enough. I walked in braced for impact, and my therapist slid a notepad toward me like we were gearing up for a rehearsal. We practiced scripts, actual lines, for when relatives tried to guilt-trip me or pick a fight. Different scenarios, different calm answers. She kept reminding me, you can't control their reactions, only your responses. We talked about how to keep ties with the relatives who were open to change, and how to protect myself from the ones who weren't. Her homework for me, give my attention to the people who'd reached out kindly and give everyone else time to process. The following week she suggested a grief support group. I almost bailed at the door of the community center, but the group leader welcomed me in like I'd been expected. Story after story rolled out, families building rigid rules after someone died, clinging to them like life rafts that didn't actually float. One woman said her family banned swimming after her uncle drowned, now the kids were scared of bathtubs. A man shared how his family canceled birthdays after his sister died at a party, every cake turned into a memorial. A couple said their relatives refused to drive on highways after a crash, adding hours to every trip. The leader put it plainly, rules can give the illusion of control when tragedy feels random. Hearing other people describe my life with different details made me feel less alone. Meanwhile, Rita's sister had been neck-deep in court records and turned up a bombshell about Igor's death. She handed me a manila folder, a civil settlement between my parents and the pool owner's insurance. No fence around the pool. No shallow end markers. A teenage lifeguard texting instead of watching swimmers. My parents had received a $$100,000 settlement 8 years ago and never told me. The paper spelled out negligence in black and white, nothing about white swim trunks or curses. That afternoon, a handwriting wobbly envelope arrived from my grandmother, no return address. Inside was a short note. She couldn't talk about Greta, but she understood I needed answers. She'd included a photo from that Labor Day. My heart stalled. Greta's dress was white, with pink flowers. Not the pure white our family always swore she'd worn. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the picture, then snapped a photo of it on my phone and tucked the original back into the envelope like it could break. Monday hit me like a truck. I dragged myself to work. My coworker took one look and asked if I was okay. I muttered something about family stuff. 10 minutes later my boss called me in, shut the door, and gently told me Mom had been calling the office every single day since the barbecue, sometimes 3 or 4 times, asking if I was suicidal or having a breakdown. The receptionist had started screening her, but Mom kept spoofing numbers. HR wanted documentation that I was stable or they'd have to put me on leave. My face burned. I showed my boss text confirming my therapy appointments and that I wasn't in crisis. She copied everything, promised HR would block Mom's number from the main line, and offered to flex my schedule so I could attend therapy without burning sick days. I thanked her, then stared at spreadsheets the rest of the afternoon without processing a single cell. Thursday rolled around with a new plan. My therapist said the hospital fiasco had carved out a fresh fear of water in me. I'd noticed it, tensing up by the office water cooler, skirting the bathroom because the flush sounded like a wave. So, exposure therapy. We started at the park across the street with a tall fountain spraying 10 feet in the air. We sat 20 feet away while I breathed through the urge to bolt. Every few minutes I scooted 5 feet closer. Eventually I sat at the edge, mist cooling my cheeks. It felt ridiculous, and also like I'd reclaimed something tiny but important. Next session I put my hand into the fountain and counted to 30. After that we sat in the bleachers at the community pool watching little kids take swim lessons. By the 3rd week I could stand at the pool's edge without my heart stampeding. Rita was a rock through all of it, daily check-ins, surprise dinners when I forgot to eat. One Saturday she asked if I wanted to go somewhere I'd been avoiding. Pine Lake was 40 minutes away, the car ride was quiet. The lot was nearly empty, summer had faded. We walked to the dock. It was shockingly narrow, maybe 3 feet across, with gaps between the planks big enough for a child's foot to slip. No barrier, no rope, just wood and deep water. I stood there for 20 minutes, staring into the dark green and thinking about an aunt I'd never met. Rita didn't push. I whispered, "Goodbye, Greta," and promised I'd help heal our family the right way. On the drive back, Rita mentioned her mom had old photos in storage and she'd been digitizing them. There was an entire album from that Labor Day 40 years ago. Her mom had been friends with my grandmother and took pictures at every gathering. She emailed them to me that night. 15 shots. Adults with beers, kids sprinting past with hot dogs. One photo, judging by shadows around noon, showed Greta in blue shorts and a striped shirt at the picnic table, paper plate in hand. Another from mid-afternoon showed the same outfit, laughing with other kids. She'd changed at some point, so the saga about her showing off her white dress all day was made up. My anger thinned into something sadder. Mom had been 8, just a child, watching her 6-year-old sister while the grown-ups played cards and drank. Then Greta drowned, and Mom carried 40 years of blame around like a boulder. The white clothes rule wasn't about safety, it was about control. If she could forbid white after Labor Day, maybe nobody else would die. It was magical thinking from a terrified child who never got help. Understanding didn't make what she'd done to me okay. But it made it make sense. I spent the next 3 days buried in the library's microfiche drawers pulling weather records. September 3rd, 40 years ago, severe thunderstorm warnings all day, gusts up to 50 miles per hour. The paper had run a caution the day before, telling people to avoid lakes and rivers. Uncle James died during a so-called 100-year storm, with waterspouts recorded on the lake. Igor's drowning happened amid flash flood conditions that killed 3 other people that same weekend. I built a spreadsheet, dates, weather, warning levels, and the pattern screamed at me. Every single death lined up with authorities begging people to stay away from the water. I made a simple chart, attached the weather documentation, and wrote an email to Paul, Amy, and Jake, just the facts. No editorializing, no heat. If they could see the data, maybe they'd understand. Then I started another document, a family water safety memo. Real useful stuff, everyone learns to swim, life jackets aren't optional for kids, never swim alone, check weather, assign a sober adult as water watcher. I framed it as honoring Greta, James, and Igor by preventing future tragedies, not by policing laundry choices. Monday morning as I reviewed the memo, my phone buzzed. A wall of text from Mom, typos, fury, panic. She'd heard about my weather research, probably from Grandma. She warned that if I sent my lies to one more relative, she'd cut me off, change her will, block me everywhere, tell the family I was dead to her. The words sliced deeper than I expected. I typed back that I loved her and my door would be open when she was ready to get help. Then I blocked her number. I needed quiet to heal. I sent the safety memo to Paul first. He replied within an hour, it all tracked, he'd been thinking the same things. Amy texted that afternoon, she'd help push real safety at family events. Jake called that evening and admitted he'd spent his childhood scanning outfits instead of hazards, terrified at every lakeside gathering. Paul confessed he'd always thought the white rule was bizarre, but when he questioned it at 12, his mom slapped him. We agreed we'd be the change. The next morning my phone flashed Sienna. I almost let it ring out, she never calls me. Her voice was smaller than I've ever heard it. She apologized for years of sniping about my clothes. Every September, she panicked about what people wore and dumped it on me because I didn't seem to care. She hadn't taken a bath since she was 5, only quick showers, and hadn't swum since childhood. Then she asked if we could take swimming lessons together. I stood there speechless with my toothbrush in hand. Sienna, the queen of snark, asking to be swim buddies. But she sounded real. Exhausted. Done with fear. I said yes. We booked our first lesson for Saturday and planned to meet Paul and Amy at the coffee shop near the community center afterward. Jake came with his girlfriend, who'd watched our family drama from the outside and brought perspective we needed. The 5 of us grabbed a corner table. Paul opened a notebook like we were launching a startup. Amy suggested rotating water watchers at gatherings, not to check clothing but to actually watch the water. Jake's girlfriend offered to design laminated cards with signs of real drowning, because it doesn't look like the movies. We divvied up responsibilities. Paul would monitor weather, Amy would manage life jackets, Jake would ensure sober supervision. It felt eerie to plan without half the family, but productive for once. As we sipped our coffees, Jake said something that floored me. Uncle Ted's brother had questioned the white clothes myth for years. He'd brought water safety research to a family meeting a decade ago and got shouted down so viciously he moved to Oregon. Jake's girlfriend added that her mom went to school with Uncle James and remembered him as a reckless heavy drinker. Paul nodded. Apparently at least 6 relatives had privately expressed doubts over the years, but were too scared of Mom and Aunt Paige to speak. Even Uncle Ted once suggested swim lessons for all the kids and got shut down because the family decided avoiding white was protection enough. 3 days later, I was choosing cereal when Aunt Paige appeared at the end of the aisle like a storm front. She marched over, voice loud enough to turn heads. She accused me of destroying our family and spitting on the graves of children. I kept my voice level. Teaching kids to swim honors them more than checking outfit colors. She called me heartless, said I'd cursed us all. Phones came out, people stared. I said plainly, Greta drowned because no one was watching, not because of a dress. Her hand twitched like she might slap me. Then she registered the audience, spun around and stormed off, shoulder-checking a cracker display on her way. That week in therapy, we prepped for eventual contact with Mom. My therapist set 2 chairs facing each other and I played both parts. As Mom, I spoke her fear and fury out loud. Hearing it with my voice made it feel almost human. As myself, I practiced staying steady, setting boundaries, saying I loved her, refusing to re-enter the superstition. We walked through. What if she cries? What if she yells? What if she threatens to hurt herself? The answer was always the same. I can't control Mom. I can only choose my response. We ended by naming what I was grieving, the mother-daughter relationship I might never have if she stayed anchored to the myth. Afterward, I met Paul and his girlfriend for sandwiches. She's a social worker who specializes in family trauma. She offered to facilitate if Mom ever wanted mediation and explained how she'd seen grief calcify into rules that get passed down like heirlooms. She handed me her card. I thanked her, honestly unsure Mom would ever agree. That weekend I started a project I'd been imagining since those photos surfaced. I bought a quality album and began curating pictures of Greta, Uncle James, and Igor, images that showed their lives, not their deaths. I found Greta's kindergarten photo in Grandma's old albums. Uncle James was everywhere, laughing, strumming a guitar. Igor's baby pictures hurt to look at, but I included them. Beneath each photo I wrote something gentle. Greta loved butterflies. James played in a band. Igor's first word was dog. At therapy, I brought the album. My therapist turned the pages slowly and said I was reframing them as whole people. We talked about when to show Mom, maybe later if she started therapy herself. The photo of Greta in different outfits from the same day, she said, might help crack the myth. Time got strange, some days syrup slow, others gone in a blink. 3 months after Labor Day, just when I'd accepted Mom might never bend, my phone lit up with her name. Her text was long, messy, full of typos. Nightmares. Panic attacks. Her doctor had given her anxiety meds and told her to seek therapy for the root cause. She wanted to meet, with Paul's girlfriend as mediator. My hands shook as I typed yes and sent the contact info. The support group had become my anchor. After one meeting, the leader pulled me aside. She ran workshops on complicated grief and family myths and asked if I'd share my story. She said hearing from someone mid-journey helps more than a slideshow. I agreed. It could be practice for my own family if they ever chose to really listen. 2 weeks of prep later, Sienna and I were 10 swim lessons in, still clumsy, still proud. During backstroke drills, she blurted an idea, a proper memorial for Greta, James, and Igor. Not a dirge, something useful. By the water, yes, but with safety demos and life jacket donations for families who couldn't afford them. We could honor them by keeping other people alive. The idea clicked into place like a seatbelt. A few days after, a small package arrived, no return address but Grandma's handwriting on the label. Inside, a worn locket with Greta's photo, the metal softened by decades of touch. Her note said she was too old and tired to change her beliefs, but she knew I was trying to help. She asked me to remember Greta as a child who loved butterflies and dancing, not a cautionary tale. The last line made me cry. Maybe I was brave enough to save our family from itself. The next week Sienna called. Let's do the memorial. I drove to her place and we spent 3 hours on the phone. Water safety organizations agreed to send instructors. We booked the community pool for a Saturday afternoon and made a Facebook event that talked about education and remembrance, no mention of clothing or curses. Paul set up donation boxes for life jackets. Memorial Day, I got there early to help set tables around the shallow end. Around 20 relatives showed, far more than I expected. Lifeguards demonstrated rescues while everyone stood on deck wearing bright orange life jackets we'd bought in bulk. Sienna read water safety stats, heads nodded. Jake brought photos of the 3 we'd lost, birthday parties, school plays, normal life. People smiled. They told stories I'd never heard. No one said white. No one said Labor Day. No one said curse. 2 days later the mediator called. Mom wanted to meet, if I was willing. I went to the downtown office. Mom was already there in the conference room, looking smaller than I remembered, twisting her wedding ring. The mediator reviewed the ground rules: respect, listening, no interruptions. Mom spoke first. She said she'd been thinking about everything and maybe the clothing thing wasn't completely real. But she couldn't just turn off 40 years of believing. The mediator nodded and asked what not completely real meant in practice, what she could let go of, what she needed help unlearning, and how we'd keep each other safe while we figured it out. And for the first time, it felt like we might be stepping carefully toward the shore. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I walked into therapy like I was clocking in for a shift at the Boundary Factory. My therapist had me rehearse actual scripts, word for when relatives tried to guilt me or pick a fight. We ran through scenes like we were staging a play: what I'd say if someone accused me of disrespecting the dead, what I'd say if they begged me to just stop talking about it, what I'd say if they exploded. Same calm tone. Same steady pace. She kept repeating, "You don't manage their reactions, you manage your response." We mapped out how to keep relationships alive with the people who were open to change, and how to guard my peace from the ones who weren't. Her homework? Pour my energy into the relatives who'd reached out with support, and give the rest time and distance. The next week, she nudged me toward a grief support group. I almost turned around in the community center parking lot, but the leader met me at the door and made the room feel soft around the edges. People went around sharing, and a pattern unfolded. After a loss, families invent rules like scaffolding around a crumbling building. One woman said her family banned swimming forever after her uncle drowned. Now the kids were afraid of bathtubs. A guy said birthdays vanished after his sister died at a party. Cake day became a Memorial Day. Another couple talked about relatives who refused highways after a crash, adding hours to every trip because the back roads felt safer. The leader said those rules are a way to pretend we can control random tragedy. Hearing strangers describe my family with different details made me feel less weird, less alone. Meanwhile, Rita's sister had been spelunking through court records and turned up a bombshell about Igor. She handed me a manila folder, a civil settlement between my parents and the pool owner's insurance company. The pool had no fence. No shallow end markers. The teen lifeguard was texting instead of watching the water. My parents got a $100,000 settlement 8 years ago and never said a word. The papers screamed negligence, nothing about white swim trunks. That afternoon, a shaky handwritten envelope arrived from Grandma, no return address. Inside, a short note saying she couldn't talk about Greta but understood I needed answers. Tucked behind it was a photo from that Labor Day. My breath caught. Greta's dress was white, with pink flowers. Not the solid white that's been gospel in our family lore. My hands trembled so hard I dropped the picture. I snapped a photo on my phone and slid the original back into the envelope like it might crumble. Monday, I dragged myself to work on fumes. My coworker asked if I was okay. I muttered something about family stuff and kept walking. 10 minutes later, my boss called me in, shut the door, and gave me the face. Then she said Mom had been calling the office every day since the barbecue, sometimes 3 or 4 times, asking if I was suicidal or in the middle of a breakdown. The receptionist started screening her, but Mom kept swapping numbers. HR wanted documentation that I was stable or they'd have to put me on leave. Heat crawled up my neck. I pulled out my phone and showed texts confirming my therapy sessions and that I was not in crisis. My boss made copies, said HR would block Mom's number, and offered to flex my schedule so I didn't burn sick time for therapy. I thanked her and went back to my desk where spreadsheets blurred into gray static. By Thursday, my therapist had a new plan. She said the hospital fiasco carved a fresh, twitchy fear of water into me. She wasn't wrong. I tensed by the office water cooler and avoided the bathroom because the flush sounded like a wave chasing my ankles. Exposure therapy, baby. We started at the park across from her office, where a fountain launched water 10 feet into the air. We sat 20 feet away while I breathed through the urge to bolt. Every few minutes, I scooted 5 feet closer. Eventually, I sat on the edge with cool mist kissing my face. It felt silly and like I'd wrestled back a square inch of my life. The next session, I put my hand in the fountain and counted to 30. After that, we sat in the bleachers at the community pool and watched kindergartners splashing through swim lessons. By week 3, I could stand at the pool's edge without my heart sprinting a marathon. Rita was a literal lifeline, daily check-ins, surprise dinners when I forgot to eat. One Saturday she asked if I wanted to go somewhere. Pine Lake. The drive was quiet. The parking lot was almost empty. Summer had rolled up and left town. We walked to the dock. It was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, with gaps between the planks big enough to swallow a small foot. No fence. No rope. Nothing between wood and dark water. I stood there for 20 minutes staring into the green and thinking about an aunt I never got to meet. Rita didn't push. I whispered, "Bye, Greta," and promised I'd help heal the family the right way. On the ride back, Rita mentioned her mom had old photos stashed away, and she'd been digitizing them. Turns out there was a whole album from that Labor Day 40 years ago. Her mom was friends with my grandmother and photographed everything. She emailed me 15 pictures that night. Most were adults with beers and kids sprinting past with hot dogs. One shot, midday judging by the shadows, showed Greta in blue shorts and a striped shirt, holding a paper plate near the picnic table. Another, likely mid-afternoon, showed her in the same outfit, laughing with other kids. So she changed clothes at some point. The myth about showing off her white dress all day wasn't history, it was a story. My anger cooled into something heavier. Mom was 8. A child told to keep an eye on a 6-year-old while adults played cards and drank. Greta drowned and Mom carried 40 years of blame like a stone in her pocket. The white rule wasn't about safety. It was about control. If she could police color after Labor Day, maybe no one else would disappear. Magical thinking from a terrified child who never got help. It didn't make what she did to me okay, but it made it make sense. I spent 3 days swimming in microfiche at the library. Weather records, September 3rd, 40 years ago, severe thunderstorm warnings all day, wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour. The paper ran a warning the day before, stay away from lakes and rivers. Uncle James died during a 100-year storm with waterspouts recorded on the lake. Igor drowned amid flash flood conditions that killed 3 other people that same weekend. I built a spreadsheet, dates, weather, warnings, and the pattern shouted, every death happened while authorities begged people to stay out of the water. I made a simple chart, attached the weather docs, and emailed Paul, Amy, and Jake, no commentary, just evidence. Then I drafted something else, a family water safety memo. Real rules, everyone learns to swim, life jackets aren't optional for kids, nobody swims alone, check weather, assign a sober adult as water watcher. I framed it as honoring Greta, James, and Igor by preventing new tragedies, not policing wardrobes. Monday morning as I polished the memo, my phone lit up. A wall of text from Mom, typos, rage, panic. Someone, probably Grandma, had told her I was circulating research. She said if I sent my lies to one more relative, she'd cut me off, change her will, block me everywhere, tell the family I was dead to her. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I texted back that I loved her and my door would be open when she was ready for help. Then I blocked her number. I needed quiet to breathe. I sent the memo to Paul first. He replied within an hour, it all made sense, he'd been thinking the same. Amy agreed to champion safety at gatherings. Jake called that night and confessed he'd spent childhood barbecues scanning outfits instead of hazards. Paul admitted he'd questioned the rule at 12 and got slapped for it. We decided we'd be the change. The next morning, Sienna flashed on my screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. Her voice was small. She apologized for years of jabs about my clothes, said every September she spiraled and took it out on me because I didn't seem scared enough. She hadn't taken a bath since she was 5, only quick showers, and hadn't swum since she was a kid. Then she asked if we could take swim lessons together. I stood there, toothbrush in hand, stunned. Sienna, the snark queen, asking to be my swim buddy. But she sounded exhausted. Real. I said yes. We booked our first lesson for Saturday and met Paul and Amy afterward at the coffee shop near the community center. Jake came with his girlfriend, who had the outsider's clarity we needed. We grabbed a corner table and drew up an actual plan. Amy proposed rotating water watch shifts at gatherings, someone sober, eyes on the water, whistle and rescue pole nearby. Jake's girlfriend offered to design laminated cards with real signs of drowning, because it's quiet, not flailing like the movies. We split responsibilities, Paul, weather monitoring. Amy, life jackets. Jake, sober supervision. It felt weird planning without half the family, but also like progress wasn't waiting for permission. Midweek, Jake said something that floored me. Uncle Ted's brother had questioned the white rule for years. 10 years ago, he brought water safety research to a family meeting and got shouted down so hard he moved to Oregon. Jake's girlfriend added that her mom knew Uncle James from school, said he was a reckless heavy drinker. Paul nodded. At least 6 relatives had privately doubted the rule, but fear of Mom and Aunt Paige shut their mouths. Even Uncle Ted once suggested swim lessons for all the kids, shot down because no white was apparently protection enough. 3 days later, I was choosing cereal when Aunt Paige charged down the aisle like a tornado. She accused me loudly of destroying the family and spitting on children's graves. I kept my voice low. Teaching kids to swim honors them more than checking clothing. She said I'd cursed us all. Phones came out. Some shoppers stared, some looked away. I said, plain and steady, Greta drowned because no one was watching. Not because of a dress. Her hand twitched like she might slap me. Then she noticed the cameras, turned on her heel and clipped a cracker display on her way out. That week in therapy we practiced for Mom. 2 chairs. I played both parts. As Mom, I spoke her fear and fury out loud, it made it feel human-sized. As me, I practiced staying steady. I love you, these are my boundaries, I won't return to superstition. What if she cries? What if she yells? What if she threatens to hurt herself? The therapist asked. The answer never changed, I can't control Mom. I can only choose my response. We spent the last 20 minutes naming grief, the mother-daughter relationship I might never have if she stayed married to the myth. Afterward, I met Paul and his girlfriend for sandwiches. She's a social worker in family trauma and offered mediation if Mom ever wanted it. She's helped families dismantle rules born from grief. She handed me her card and told me to call anytime. That weekend, I started a project that felt right in my bones. I bought a good photo album and began curating pictures of Greta, Uncle James, and Igor that showed their lives, not their deaths. Greta's kindergarten portrait from Grandma's albums. James laughing, guitar in hand. Igor's baby photos, those hurt, but I included them. I wrote gentle notes under each. Greta loved butterflies. James played in a band. Igor's first word, dog. I brought the album to therapy. My therapist said I was giving them back their humanity. We talked about when to share it with Mom, maybe after more therapy. The side-by-side photos of Greta in different outfits from the same day might loosen the story's grip. Time stretched and snapped both at once. 3 months after the mediation, Mom texted asking for lunch, just us. I picked a quiet spot downtown. She looked better, color in her cheeks, hands steady. She said she'd started seeing a therapist who specializes in childhood trauma and survivor's guilt. They were separating real memories from the story she built around Greta. She didn't apologize for the hospital, but she admitted her fear had taken the wheel that day. She asked for monthly coffee dates with clear boundaries. I agreed, as long as clothes and water stayed off limits for now. She accepted. She even smiled. 2 weeks later, Grandma called a meeting at her house. Almost everyone came, even the relatives who'd ghosted since Labor Day. She stood in the living room holding the same photo she'd mailed me and said it was time to retire the white clothing rule. She didn't say it was wrong, she said it had served its purpose, and now there were real safety measures in place. Relief rippled through the room. Uncle Ted's brother muttered something about tempting fate, but Grandma kept her gaze forward. She wanted great-grandchildren learning to swim, families enjoying water safely. Meanwhile, Sienna and I had been grinding through lessons, 2 a week for 3 months. We could do all 4 strokes without panicking now. My butterfly looked like an angry moth, but still. Our instructor said we'd be good candidates for water safety instructor certification. We signed up on the spot. 6 weeks of evening classes later, we both passed. The community center gave us Saturday afternoons for classes. We put up flyers and posted in local Facebook groups. 12 people showed up the first day: Paul and his girlfriend, 2 cousins who'd been quietly supportive, and a handful of locals. We started with back floats in the shallow end, watching people's faces unclench as they realized we weren't tossing anyone into the deep end. Sienna handled waivers and equipment, I demoed skills and did slow laps around the deck, spotting anyone who looked uneasy. Halfway through, an older woman cried because she managed a 10-second float. She hadn't touched water since her grandson's accident 3 years ago. We extended class by 30 minutes so everyone could practice more. Afterward, Paul helped us stack kickboards and pool noodles. My phone buzzed. Mom. Proud of you for teaching safety. No mention of coming to watch, but still. That same week, our family group chat changed its name from Family Emergency Alerts to Family News and Plans when Amy posted a photo from her daughter's soccer game. Suddenly there were recipes, birthday reminders, normal chatter. Jake dropped a beach picture where he was very clearly wearing white board shorts, and no one said a word. The chat felt lighter. Like a room with windows. As August slid into September, my stomach tightened at the thought of Labor Day. Even with breathing exercises and coping strategies, I kept bracing for old ghosts. The plan, a barbecue at Grandma's. But the group chat looked different this year, actual safety logistics. Paul volunteered to be the sober pool watcher. Ted rented temporary fencing. Dozens of messages about food assignments and setup. Not one about clothing. I chose a floral sundress with white flowers, my small stress test for all of us. The morning of, I drove to Grandma's with only a slight tremor in my hands. The temporary fence was already around the pool. Jake set up a table with life jackets in every size right by the gate. Kids tore around in bright orange vests, and their parents looked relaxed instead of hovering. Interesting conversation happening here. I wonder what they're really thinking. Paul waved from a chair beside the pool, whistle and rescue pole within reach, taking his role seriously. The food tables were safely far from water. Multiple adults had signed up for pool watch shifts. Mom arrived an hour later. She gave my dress a little nod and didn't comment. She stuck by the food tables with Aunt Paige, talking quietly. Every so often I caught her glancing at me with something like acceptance. More family trickled in. No clothing inspections. Ted's nephew wore a white polo. Amy's daughter had a white sundress like mine. Conversations drifted toward work, school, vacations. Kids splashed under steady supervision while adults rotated safety duty without making it a production. Laminated safety rules hung by the gate. The younger kids had buddy bracelets. Around 3, I passed a cluster of relatives chatting about vacation plans instead of September water doom. The whole atmosphere felt unlike any gathering I could remember, lighter but safer. Grandma sat in her chair with a small smile, calling kids over for hugs. No tears. No speeches about the past. As the sun slid down, people drifted toward the seating area. Paul kept his post by the now empty pool. Grandma stood up and suggested we share happy memories of Greta, James, and Igor. People actually smiled. Stories rolled out: Greta's butterfly drawings, James's terrible jokes, Igor's dinosaur roars. Mom surprised everyone by describing how Greta would whirl around the living room in her butterfly wings until she got dizzy and giggled herself to the floor. She cried while she said it, but she was smiling too. Aunt Paige squeezed her hand. Even the quiet relatives spoke up, little moments, not eulogies. The sky went peach and pink. No one said drowning. No one said clothes. That night after I got home, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom made me sit down. You were brave to break the cycle. Therapy is helping me see things differently. I love you. The first I love you in months. I screenshotted it and saved it everywhere. Not a full apology. But real. The next morning, I opened my journal and poured out 2 hours of words. This Labor Day was nothing like last year's chaos. We had real safety measures instead of superstition. People were healing, even if some relationships still had sharp edges. The journey was awful and expensive, and I lost some relatives to the myth. But sitting there, pen in hand, I felt genuinely okay with where we'd landed. Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.